So Diana knows she's going to be asked, and already presumably have been quite a lot. Why women and climate change? Why are you doing it?
Well, it's funny you should mention it. That is a question that I have gotten on a number of occasions in just the short time that I've been here. You know, I tell people that I'm here from an international women's human rights organization, and this puzzled look comes on over their faces. And while it's not immediately intuitive to people, once you start to unpack the issue, it becomes very obvious what our message is, which is that climate change is a women's issue, that women around the world are impacted differently by climate change than men are. And so in a lot of the same ways that other women's issues play out, excuse me, climate change is one of those as well. So, I could give examples. For example, I think I heard the previous person who was on here talking about how agriculture is affected by climate change, how food production is degraded as temperatures rise, as droughts become more common, as we see all of these intensified weather patterns that aren't typical. So while people are aware that this is an issue, people should also be aware that around the world women are heavily and significantly involved in the agricultural process. In a lot of communities, women are responsible for raising food for their families, for sustaining their communities in that way. So when we see these weather patterns changing, we see it dramatically affecting the livelihoods of women. Another example is, I sort of alluded to it already, is related to droughts, and how when droughts become more intensified, then women who are responsible for bringing about, for supplying water for their families, for walking to the wells and bringing it back, that workload becomes harder for women. So there's a lot of different examples that you could bring in that sort of illustrate what is maybe not immediately apparent to people.
Are you making specific demands? Do you want language written into a text of an agreement, or are you just hoping to educate some of the diplomats and negotiators? What is it you really want out of the conference that will affect, ultimately, women's lives?
Well, our expectations are high. They have to be high in order for us to make the kind of change that we're looking for. But we're not starting from a very, inspiring point. The major UN documents that a lot of this is based on, for example, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is sort of like the base document on this, and the Kyoto Protocol as well, neither of which mention gender or women. So even having that first step of just mentioning women, and hopefully mentioning women in a way that is constructive and will work towards alleviating a lot of this gender discrimination, that's an important first step. So I think that is a major concern of the Gender Caucus, to even generate this discussion, because as of yet it hasn't really happened.
Okay, a couple of questions come in. I don't know, this is a tricky one for you to answer, but I put it, it's a genuine question floating around. Is Hillary Clinton a woman of influence? Well, sorry, that's not the question. That's the definition of Hillary Clinton. Is Hillary Clinton genuinely worried about climate change? Will she take strong action if she wins?
Well, I can't say that I'm an expert on Hillary Clinton and her positions. What I can say, though, is when you look at U.S. politics, there is more of an awareness of climate change, definitely. I was in discussions earlier today where people were talking about how, especially among how do each other on who can be the green candidate, who can be the greenest candidate. And it shows it's a real indication of how far this issue has come, especially in the U.S. context, where climate change and a lot of these issues weren't really a priority in the past. And so I think that one thing that's important to recognize is that a lot of the frameworks that we're using to approach these, Hillary Clinton and as well as a lot of the other Democratic candidates, are based in approaches that need to undergo a heavy critique. And one thing that we as MADRE has identified as an example of this is this whole carbon trading notion, which is something that Hillary Clinton and a lot of the other Democratic candidates have tried to get behind as a solution to climate change. And our critique of that is that it's trying to impose a market solution on a problem that won't necessarily come out, be solved in that way. You're trying to put the solution in the hands of people who are largely responsible for having created the problem, in industries, corporations, and that sort of thing. So, Hillary Clinton, she is a woman. I'm not going to deny that, but I think that what we need to be looking for is is the gender perspective specifically, talking about how women are affected by climate change.
Here's another one from Anna in the UK. Do you think gender issues are taken seriously within the environmental movement?
I think that there's a long ways to go, but I think that like I was saying before, like while it's not the first thing that comes to people's minds, I think that people are increasingly more receptive to it. I think that, you know, you were talking about that UNICEF slogan, the African farmer and her husband, that it is something that is not something that comes to people immediately, but people, when it's brought to their attention, it's a very powerful idea, and it's something that's hard to shake in that way.
Okay, keep the questions coming, folks. This is part of the point of this exercise is to get people involved in the process. It is a wonderful opportunity. It's a new opportunity, thanks to the Second Life technology, which is advancing by the day, and it enables people to put the questions and get some answers. So some of these answers are getting tricky. What hopes have you about a new U.S. administration? Do you think Democrats will get in, and would it make any difference?
Like I was saying before, Democrats have been trying to outdo each other to see who has the greenest policies, who can be the climate change candidate. In terms of actually shifting the tone of the dialogue, a lot of the things that I've been hearing just in the short time that I've been here is that the Bush administration approach to climate change is seen increasingly as the way of the past. That this can't be where the U.S. continues into the future. So I mean, I think it's a fair assumption that the U.S. will have to make some pretty significant changes in the coming months and years, and some of that has already been happening at the Senate level, for example. But I mean, it is hard to say. I mean, we can have high hopes, but history hasn't played out so well so far.
I'd just like to ask you whether you think other international agreements would have benefited from a bigger women's presence, you know, a gender perspective. There are people playing that up more than in the past. Do you think this is something that applies across the board to trade talks, to all international agreements?
I mean, well, the easy answer to that is yes. I mean, there's all sorts of different issues that you can bring up that show how in multiple areas women are at a disadvantage because of this gender divide that does exist in our world, and I really can't think of any exceptions to that right now. So I mean, basically, yes.
Okay, that's really interesting. What is just as a final question, how are we going to know, and how will you know whether what you've been doing here in terms of lobbying is a success? What is it when this fortnight is finished, everybody goes away? You're going to say, no, we could have done better, or gender is not, they didn't take it on board, or we did really well, or the delegates did well. People, we all want to know. You need some sort of measure. What is it? What is it going to be? What do you really want? And that you could turn around and say when you go home, it's a success or it's a failure.
Well, I mean, like I was saying, our first step priority is to get delegates to get the discussion around gender to even start happening. So if we can get that to happen, then that will be some measure of success. Then the next step, of course, is to make sure that the discussion is full, that it's complete, that it addresses a lot of these different permutations and issues that come up, and then it's been actually implemented. And that's, I mean, it's a huge, huge challenge, and I don't expect that, you know, this time next week that we'll be, you know, have taken any sorts of leaps and bounds to reverse the current trend that we're on. But I think that is sort of the vision that we have to have for the future.
Well, thank you very much, Diana Duarte of MADRE, and I wish you luck in your lobbying and caucusing. And I'm going to sign off, but just to remind you, it's OneWorld.net. There's plenty of information on OneWorld.net. There's information on One Climate, and obviously on the Second Life Island as well.